Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Miami View Women. My name is Irela Bagué, and I am joined by my beautiful co-host, Carolina Castillo. And we are thrilled to have you on our last show of 2020. Yes, we're almost over the year.
We're so looking forward to 2021. There's so much optimism in the air. This week is incredible, hasn't it?
It's been a crazy, incredible week of lots of things, lots of firsts. The vaccine, people are getting vaccinated. Yes, time to celebrate.
It's amazing seeing our doctors and nurses getting vaccinated at Jackson, and it's just a wonderful thing. Also, there's a lot of firsts with President-elect Joe Biden. We have the first Native American woman who is Congresswoman Deb Haaland, right? Did I pronounce that correctly?
The Department of Interior, our national parks and monuments, and all of these amazing places that
how incredible to have a Native American to take care of our land. I mean, it's just perfection. It really is.
You would think this would have happened by now. I mean, seriously. But hey, we'll take it. We'll take it now. We'll end the year with some good news. So, but another thing that happened,
surprise, right?
We have a surprise. We have our own logo for Miami View Women. Woohoo!
You know what I love about it too? That the women looks like it's a signature of all the women in our community. It's like
that's true. That's true, and it's also very Wonder Woman. It looks like the Wonder Woman W thing. So I love it. Thank you, everyone, for supporting our show. And thank you, Miriam Dorset. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. You're a beautiful producer behind the scenes. And with that, I am thrilled and honored to have with us Dr. Cheryl Holder, because if anyone does God's work, it's this lady. Given the COVID pandemic and Miami being ground zero for climate change, what she's doing for our community is just unbelievable. Dr. Holder is a board certified internal medicine doctor. She's dedicated her career to serving underserved populations. She developed an HIV care and treatment program and is a huge advocate of how the climate change is impacting our underserved communities in a disproportionate way. And with that, welcome, Dr. Holder. It is such a pleasure to have you on Miami View Women, especially on our last show, to talk about all the things that we could do better to help our community.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. And I love your new logo. And I do like that signature of women, because we are the Biden administration has definitely brought us into the decision making, which is where we should be, because our voices are so important.
Always.
Absolutely. So, diversity and representation is what we need most. And that's why we're so happy to also have you here to talk about that.
Absolutely. I'm the new interim dean, associate dean of diversity, equity, inclusivity, and community initiatives at Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine, because as you say, diversity is so important.
That is fantastic. And we're starting to see that more and more, and I'm so glad. And what better representative than yourself? I have some questions. By the way, for those that have not seen Dr. Holder's TED Talk, it is outstanding. It's one of the best I've ever seen.
Oh,
so with that, some of the things that came to mind after watching your TED Talk, number one, obviously you've dealt with an epidemic such as HIV. And so my question to you was, obviously we're in a pandemic, which is massive, but there are correlations, and perhaps you can share with us some of the similarities and some of the things that, in our community, what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Our numbers are like incredibly high here. We're like ground zero for that.
13K in 2 days. It's insane.
Well, this pandemic, HIV, pandemic, climate change are very, very similar in that all of us are out here at risk. And especially when you look at coronavirus and climate change, it's just going out and breathing and living. In some other infectious processes, there are things that you do that may increase your risk. But when you talk about just going out and doing your day-to-day life of breathing, and you could get something that could kill you, that's when we see the real similarities between coronavirus and climate change, because we're all living in a planet that is warming and is putting us all at risk. Now, where we really talk about disparities is that there's some people and some groups, for many reasons, that will feel the impact greater and feel it earlier at a much higher level. And we're seeing a similar situation in coronavirus, but there's some of us who get it and may not be as bad, and some of us will get it and will wipe us out. And the populations that get wiped out are the same populations that are now feeling the risk of climate change much earlier and already having more severe impact. So they're very similar because the underlying factors that leads you to having more risk plays out across the world. And that's what my role is, hoping to get our communities and our physicians and our clinicians understanding that these factors are here. And coronavirus is just accelerating deaths of people who are already at a higher chance of getting the bad outcome from any possibility, anything, HIV, climate change, coronavirus, name it. And these things are what we have to address.
It's our underserved communities, right? Our lower income communities that are really getting hit, as you're explaining, even with climate gentrification. Could you explain that a little bit more to our viewers?
Well, climate change and the climate, I don't know if our viewers really understand what we're referring to. I guess you guys have heard the global warming and what happens because we're sending out all these particulates into the atmosphere. When we burn coal, we do oil, we're doing generate electricity, we send out more particles into our atmosphere. And those particles sort of trap the heat. Usually when the atmosphere is clean, it just goes out and the heat will come down from the sun and go back out because there's nothing blocking it. When there are all these little particles, because we burn all this stuff and it goes up, instead of going back out, they kind of stay in our atmosphere and warm the planet. So as we see all this warming, it does make the situation, the particles themselves impact people who live near the polluters. So if you live near coal plants, or you live near highways, or you live near power plants, and you live near farms like in Palm Beach, where they burn all the sugarcane. So if you live near those places, you're going to get the direct impact of all those little particles, and then all the changes that happens from the particles warming our planet. So we do see that why we say there are folks who are higher risk, because they get the direct impact more. Like right. There's children. A lot of folks don't realize it, but children are one of the highest risk. Infants and children. Because think about it. What goes up must come down. And when it's down, who's lowest to the ground? The kids. So ozone is lower. The pollution stay lower. So we see kids are incredibly vulnerable to all these changes with climate change and all the pollution.
Right. And also, we're talking about air. Sorry, Carolina. We're talking about air pollution in particular, and you see that in respiratory issues. So you add that's like a compounding effect when you're seeing people affected by COVID, for example.
Exactly, because COVID itself
is a compounded effect.
Well, it's a tiny. Why it's compounding? A lot of folks don't realize. The coronavirus is invisible. It's really tiny. What it does is hooks onto the other particles that are bigger that we don't see. So when you have a polluted environment and you have coronavirus, the chances of you getting a lot more to inhale and get in your body is much higher. So if you're getting a large amount of coronavirus when you inhale or you put it in your nose because it's floating in your atmosphere and it's floating everything, because your area is polluted, you end up with a worse infection. So people who live in polluted environments, when they get coronavirus, they do have severe disease. So we see the link between coronavirus and particulate matter and pollution. And it just hops on for a ride, and you get more in you.
Yes, and staying in the climate change and climate gentrification topic, also the flooding, correct? Doesn't that not violate, but disrupt the communities, the lower income communities, because you have all of these wealthy builders and contractors trying to build like in Little Haiti, where they can see that there's not a lot of flooding, and so that's a perfect opportunity for them.
Yeah, the definition is that because the community is gentrified, because there's always something desirable in the community. So gentrification doesn't happen if developers didn't think that there was something better over there. The history of why Black people in South Florida live where they live comes from many years of racism and segregation, and putting Black people in what used to be the worst areas, which were by the railroad tracks. But engineers always build railroads on the highest, sturdiest land, because you got to put those railroads. So now anything near railroad tracks in Florida tend to be the highest ground and the sturdy ground in South Florida. So now where are those communities? So with sea level rise, you have the water that comes up from below. So that's what we see in king tides, because Florida is limestone. And so it's very porous. So the water table is pretty close. So it's pushing the water table up. So when you have any extra rain or anything else, it comes in. Oh, I'm sorry, I have the extra noise.
It's okay.
It's okay. I do have to stop. It will continue. 2 seconds. So as the water comes up, there's increased flooding, and we see when it's sunshine and the beach and other places where the water is high, it comes up. During extreme weather events, and one thing that happens because it's warmer and the ocean evaporates, you have really strong rain. And we had it just a few weeks ago where it rained so much because there's so much water in the clouds that when it comes back down, you get a torrential rain in a short amount of time. And that causes the flooding. So now, if you are 1 feet above sea level or 2 feet above sea level, which is by the ocean and some of the areas that used to be a place to live, you're going to start moving inland. And developers know we're going to move inland. The highest inland places, Overtown, Liberty City, Little Haiti, there are parts of Miami Gardens that have basements because they're along that ridge where it's high ground. So unfortunately, that's now becoming desirable property. And most of the population that live in the area now do not own, and so they're renting. So if the landlord can now make $1 million on his property, he's going to sell, or they will raise the rent. So we're seeing the population in those areas cannot afford the rent, and they're moving. Now, where do you think they're going to move to? Where's lowland in South Florida?
Towards the beach.
Beach is still a little expensive. Unfortunately, a lot of my folks are going down to Homestead. Every few weeks, one of my patients are moving because I work in Liberty City. And also my HIV clinic I work in, and I work with general health and HIV and general medicine. And I work between Jackson and Liberty City because they're all underserved communities. And I pretty much see uninsured people, and they're moving to Homestead or
low-lying areas.
Low-lying areas. So we're now having a potential disaster if we have any people to evacuate because of flooding. We now have people who never experienced flooding because they've always lived in high-rise in high elevated areas. So the future is going to be very difficult for Dade County with this migration internally that we're having. So we're having climate gentrification, a lot of migration because of it, internal migration, and more population and stresses that we see for our future for the governments to deal with. What's going to happen if a heavy duty storm like Andrew comes through? And a lot of the poor people are in areas that now need to be evacuated that never had to be evacuated before.
Right, right. Definitely challenges lie ahead for our county. We know that. But I feel optimistic. There's a lot of new thought leaders
Yes.
emerging.
Yes.
We're very excited with the new leadership, and hopefully we'll try to solve some of these problems. I'm always an optimist when it comes to these things. And although I'm very, very concerned about climate gentrification and the health issues that you deal with. And that's something during when I saw your TEDMED talk, struck me that you had these very personal stories about some of your patients totally linked to the climate change impacts that already we're experiencing now.
Exactly.
High levels of heat, air pollution. Can you give us a little taste of that?
For the regular, for everybody out here, I want to take the message that my patients are experiencing it more because they're out in the world. Like we've learned from coronavirus. If you got to go work, you're going to experience it. So when my patients who sell fruits, and everybody lives in Miami, know they're fruit vendors on the street corners, and they tend to come for care at Jackson. And then when I see the fruit vendor, like my patient Jorge, he gets dehydrated. And what happens with dehydration? You can sometimes affect your kidneys. Do this repeatedly because they work long hours in that heat. And we drive by and we take it for granted. Sometimes we'll buy the Ganesas or we'll buy the oranges or the limes. But that human, that person behind there is often paying a price because they can't stop working. So these are some of the areas that I see. But I now want to think about you. And if you're working at home and you wanted to go out to play this summer, think how hot it was. How long will your kids really stay out there and play? So many times they're like, go outside. Why don't the kids play outside anymore? But think about it. If it's 100 degrees and they're running around, or even 90 degrees, and children really are even higher risk because the way their body physiologically manage heat and water, it's not the same. So they're much higher risk of getting overheated and getting problems from the heat. So they're probably doing the right thing by staying indoors. So it's very hard to go outside and play. Then you also think of the mosquitoes. And one thing with the warming climate, the mosquitoes live longer. And the mosquitoes that have moved into our territory now are not the ones that just come out dawn and dusk. These are the ones that are out day and night, all the time. They live indoors. They often may, if they find their way in, they may find their way in the closet or under the bed, so they're around all the time. And these mosquitoes carry dangerous diseases like Zika, dengue, and this is what we're concerned about. So just the everyday person, doesn't have to be the poor person who happens to live in Liberty City or work on the streets, but every day we are now just cannot, especially our children again, cannot go out and have the lives that we had maybe 30 years ago because it is just so hot, especially in the summer, but so much longer. So think about your day-to-day life. You're being affected and the kids are being affected right now. Allergies, allergy season starting earlier. And especially again, the kids. When I think about it, how can we have our kids on allergy medicines for all these months? Because with the trees growing faster, they flower more. And anyone who lives in Dade County or in Florida, you can see that your grass grows a lot faster. Your trees are going up into the sky. You're going to pay more for pruning. And the flowering is coming at all different times. And the mangoes are coming in at different times. But all the pollen is creating a lot more allergies, especially in the Everglades with the ragweeds. And that is affecting all of us. So it's not just the poorer people who are experiencing now, it is now all of us are experiencing it. But there is time, we can do more.
And how do you believe that this is affecting women and children the most?
A new study just came out from Yale Environmental Study, and it does show women and children are most affected right now. We see from heat, just from pregnancy, we're seeing that heat may change with dehydration, change some of the risk of having premature labor. Also, especially if you're poor and you live in what we call heat islands, where because trees, everything is paved, it's poorer communities, maintaining trees get more expensive, so you don't see a lot of trees in communities. And the cities, you live in closer environment and less trees, it gets even hotter because the heat reflects from the concrete and the heat above. So those women definitely have higher risk of premature labor and complications during birth and blood pressure because the heat also sends up the blood pressure. Children, again, like I said, because they can't play outside as long, when they're exposed to heat, they get more heat strokes and heat complications because the way they don't sweat at the same rate, they can't get rid of the heat as we as adults can. And that changes how they respond. And the younger they are, the more vulnerable they are to having heat complications. And then as we get older, a lot of women who live longer, especially the cost of maintaining air conditioning, the cost of surviving in the heat gets very, very prohibitive. So many times older people, especially if they live in manufactured homes, tend not to be able to afford the energy cost to keep cool. I got to tell any woman out there who's menopause, the best temperature to sleep at is in the 70s. Now, if nighttime temperatures are rising, which has happened in climate change, you can't get your house to 70s like you used to naturally by just even opening windows. Now you got to have the air conditioning. If you don't have the air conditioning, you can't sleep. So this is our huge problem that we're dealing with. So women, children, pregnancy, menopause, old age, women are feeling a huge amount. And worldwide, women do a lot of the water, getting water. Women do a lot of the farming. Women do a lot of the food growth. I mean, the number one producer of food is women worldwide, and they're out in the heat trying to achieve all this, taking care of their families. So women are paying a huge price.
It's true. And you just mentioned farming. We have a lot of women farmers who are out there. Let's pivot now to COVID and COVID-19 and Corona and how exposed they are in their environment as farm workers, as single mothers that are trying to provide for their families. So it's not just climate change. They're also the most affected with COVID-19. They're losing their income. They're getting sick. They're taking care of their children while they go to virtual school. So we have a problem, ladies. You know.
We do. The biggest job loss since coronavirus has happened to women in percentage of job losses because women did most of the waitressing, the service jobs. They took the biggest hit. And then having to be home. So this is where policies come in because women are feeling the brunt of coronavirus in terms of the social impact, and same thing with climate change. So as women, we do need to respond and have that equitable response. And I think the vote recently was very good in that we're able to get people in place when it came to climate, at least acknowledging that climate exists, climate change is happening, acknowledging the health effects. Because if you don't acknowledge that a problem exists, you can't solve it. And so we are way better at this point, but we still need to stay active and hold our elected officials accountable because we're paying a big price. And that's where we need women. And when you say I'm optimistic because I know women will come through for the families.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And, to your point, climate change is real. I don't think, after the heat records that we've hit, because we've had historic heat records on top of it being 2020 being an historic year for so many things, also heat. We beat some heat records out there. So there's no question that, and look at all the hurricanes. It was like the craziest hurricane season ever.
Yep.
So for anyone out there that thinks that climate change isn't real, you know what? I don't know where you're living, but you're not living on this planet. But on that note, also, I wanted to talk about, and keeping it in the context of women, I would love for you to, we love to inspire and motivate future women that are interested in looking into and getting into the STEAM fields, science, technology, engineering, art, math, all that good stuff. And I would love to hear how you got motivated. And I'm sure you had your issues along the way, being a woman, being a Black woman, especially in the medical field.
Yeah. Well, it's been so long when I think back. For me, I'm an immigrant. I came from Jamaica and to New York when I was about 10. And the experiences of being an immigrant in a new country, in a new neighborhood. I tell folks I didn't realize I was Black till I got to America about age 10 or 11. I found out what that was and what it all meant. And I lived in a community that was East New York, which was kind of poor community. And a lot of what we call about disparities, and things would happen and folks would get sick and no ambulance would come, and just constantly you would experience these situations. And you always want to do something. But it wasn't until I got into a special high school that was just for math and science, because I always enjoyed math and science. And I went to this high school and there was a pre-med program, and it sounded like fun because I like math and science. And they placed me in a health center that I was doing blood pressure screening on the streets of this part of New York City called South Jamaica. Just all this coincidence. And I really saw Black doctors and administrators taking care of people, and that bug of wanting to help and making a difference, because I've experienced just people who just did not do well health-wise because there was no help. And that was when I realized, I think as being a doctor, I could be that person who could make the difference and help folks. Now, I thought in the beginning, I'd just be a primary care doctor, sort of the old-fashioned Marcus Welby, take care of people. And then HIV epidemic hit. And when the epidemic hit and my patients were dying, we had to do more than just give out medications. Plus, there was no medication to give at the beginning. And so that's when it's like we have to do more than even think about medications, because look at this disease, there's no medication. So all we can do now is fight it. Get folks, don't get infected, find out what's going on. Why are the folks so vulnerable? And I saw it back in my days in Brooklyn and all my experiences in medical school. And also, yes, you're pretty invisible for most of my career coming up as a medical student, and because you're one of the lone Black people in medicine back then.
Right.
But I was fortunate to do a residency program, and I chose this program because of the chair of the Department of Internal Medicine was this amazing Black doctor named Cheryl Thompson. And I met somebody who could mentor me, and I met a whole group of people who were doing great medicine who looked like me. And that took me farther to do more. And I must throw this in, that one thing that I've learned from being a doctor is that people, you trust your doctor, I trust my doctor, but who do you think is the most trusted of the health professions?
I don't know. I thought it was doctors.
Nurses.
Nurses.
Data shows nurses. Women. Nursing is overwhelmingly women.
That is great.
The trusted profession in America are nurses, which is overwhelmingly a female profession. And that's why the power, again, of health and climate and finding trusted messengers, and the power of women in doing health and making that change. That's, again, another reason I'm so optimistic about climate, because, again, we have the group of folks ready, able to make that change and to speak up and advocate. And now in medicine, 51% of the medical students now in America are female. So a lot of changes have happened.
I love hearing this from you, because my daughter, who's in the background, is always listening to our show. And you're so inspiring and uplifting. She's 11 years old. And I know your story because I saw the TEDMED that you were 10 or 11, kind of like where my daughter is at right now, where you got inspired to help go out into the community and be a doctor. And so could you tell us a little bit about just that story, just because it's so uplifting to our young generation, our daughters that are listening to you right now?
Well, that story isn't so happy, so I didn't want to go into the details. So that's why I kind of just brushed it off. I talked around it because when I was around 10, we came in 68, around the summer of 68. And that neighborhood, the kids would jump on the back of the bus in the city. And I don't know if you roller skates back then, nothing like roller skates now. You had a little key and you strap them on your shoes and you have a little key. And then they would jump at the back of the bus and hold on to the back of the bus, and then the roller skates rolled down. And my house was at the bottom of the block. And I would see these kids do this. And one day this girl, the group was coming down and they were just screaming and having a great time. And the bus somehow stopped. And the kids, some of them were able to let go. But this little girl, who I knew she was new on the block because I hadn't seen her before. And I still remember, that's why, some of these things, she didn't let go properly and she fell. And she fell and hit the back of her head. And she just laid there because she was unconscious. And we called for an ambulance. And we waited and waited and waited. And in 1968 in New York, a lot of ambulances didn't come to certain neighborhoods. There were so many reasons: poverty, disparity, just didn't come. And we waited, a cop was the one picked her up from the streets and took her to the hospital because no ambulance ever came. And that really affected all of us because we were like, oh my God, how could nobody come to help her? And from there, my brother also became a doctor. We all just knew something should have been done. It just wasn't right. And
absolutely.
I don't know what happened in the end. I hope she survived.
These are the stories that impact, right? It impacted you, and they're real stories in our underserved communities that did need help, that do need help, and it inspired you to become a doctor, and now you're changing, those communities and those underserved communities and those lower income communities where you can really make change. So we appreciate having you here so much. Thank you so much for being here. We're honored to have you. Did you want to say anything else before we?
Climate change is not doom and gloom because it's all celebrating. We're entering in a really good time because there is still time. But we do need all of us to get involved because we're all being affected now. It's not just my poor patients or in poor communities, but it's now everybody. But if we all come together, we can make that difference because there is still time to stop the pollution, change what we're doing. If you can do one thing today, cut down something that can save the planet, recycle, get a meat-free day, one day without any meat. Turn off all your lights if you're not using them. Start working and then advocate for policies that really make the change so we can save our planet. There is still time.
There is still time. But we're running out of time on our show. So thank you so much again, Dr. Holder.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Have a wonderful end of the year and so much to do for 2021. So much to look forward to. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
For your service and everything you do. Wow, that was amazing.
She's amazing. And on that track of giving back for the holidays and really giving back to our underserved communities, I wanted to give a shout out to Miami Children's Initiative annual toy drive. It's happening Sunday, December 20th. From 12 to 3 p.m. They are looking for volunteers. Tomorrow from 10 to 3 and Sunday from 10 to 3, you can call 786-488-5512. They're going to be giving out toys. They're going to be giving out food, and you do have to be a resident of Liberty City. And if you want more information, you can follow I Am Liberty City on Instagram, or Dottie Joseph, who is also Team Dottie is also helping with that initiative.
That's great. So much to do. Well, I have a little shout out for my dear cousin, Ellie Garcia, and her partners over at Circa 2020. And what they've done is they have a little pop-up shop over at Blow Me Away Salon in South Miami. This is part of a business dream that she had with a couple of friends, one of which Maria Camacho, who succumbed to ovarian cancer recently, and we're very saddened by that. But in her honor, a portion of the proceeds of what they sell at Circa 2020, which is a beautiful pop-up vintage shop and a mobile vintage shop. Maria was a fashionista, and so there's so many cool vintage items and repurposed clothing and accessories that, please, anything you can do to stop by and help them out would be great in Maria's honor. And so I'm so thrilled because my cousin is now a entrepreneur and started this business in 2020 of all years. And so we want to wish her luck and much success in the coming year as well. So it's a Circa 2020. You can follow them on Facebook. And last but not least, I want to know what that beautiful painting behind you is. We do every show. Your beautiful, talented daughter, Camila. And what was the name that we came up with?
It's called the Christmas sunflower. And Camila, we love to uplift her art here because she is, a young entrepreneur herself, and she is extremely talented. And it's just one of the things that did come out of COVID and being quarantined. And so some positive news in this COVID land, but it's about uplifting our kids and really motivating them to do more and give back as well to our community. So
perfect work of art it's very Christmassy. It's perfect work of art for our last show of the season. And one final shout out to Miami's community newspapers, where you find your hyper-local news, and who have given us a home. And we greatly appreciate Grant and Michael Miller for their support throughout a couple of years now, I think, we've been at this. So thank you again. And I wish you a very happy holiday season. Please stay safe, try to social distance, wear your masks, and
give back, volunteer. And thank you for joining us on our last 2020 show.
Yes. Happy New Year. Bye.
Happy holidays.